All right, I have a problem, and it's that my neighbor has a problem. Luckily, not with me, but with their TV cabinet. So this whole thing started because my neighbor asked me to widen their TV cabinet. They're getting a sweet new TV, and right now they use an antique TV cabinet, and it's just too darn small. So that seems simple enough, right? Just kind of stretch out the cabinet to fit that sweet new TV. But you know how things go. It's not always that simple. The original cabinet is a nice piece of furniture. It had these wild walnut veneered doors and some cool design details. But the thing about working on antique furniture is sometimes the stuff they thought was cool back then isn't so cool now. Like flathead screws. I know someone is going to give me an answer to why, but this is a rhetorical question. Why were these ever a thing? And why so many? Regardless of the flathead screws though, a very well-made piece, dovetails, obviously hand cut in places that you'll never see, which is nice, I guess. So I'll say taking it apart was impressive and frustrating. It was obviously built to last, but the reason I needed to pull it apart is that I was hopefully going to reuse some of this, a lot of this, later on. The idea is that these two outer cabinets would remain as is, and at first I thought we could just maybe pretty easily add in longer panels here, here, and here, but that ended up just being mostly wishful thinking. So what I eventually landed on was basically building all new cabinets in between these two while trying to reuse a bunch of the material from the original center section, in particular the doors, because look at them, they're sweet. So of course I'm going to use them. And before I got too far, one thing I really wanted/needed to do was a bit of a finish test because I was going to be refinishing a lot of this stuff. So I grabbed a panel that I knew I probably wouldn't be using, and luckily I was pretty surprised to see how nicely it kind of freshened up. So between realizing what the final design was going to be and how well everything was going to refinish, I was beginning to realize this wasn't just going to be a simple widen the cabinet job. And here's the thing, I think I'm a pretty good neighbor. I keep a well-mowed lawn. I try to make sure my dog doesn't bark all the time. So I knew it only made sense to do the neighborly thing and build the best damn widened antique TV cabinet for that sweet new TV that I possibly could. So let's do it. First order of business, back up that Brinks truck because 6 sheets of walnut veneered plywood cost me a pretty penny, $1,200, actually over $1,200 to be exact. Pretty sure my truck doubled in value for that 20-minute ride home, which was a bonus. All of this plywood is going to be cut up into pieces to make 4 cabinets for that center section. So while trying to forget how much each sheet costs, I could get to cutting. I'll be honest, this isn't the most exciting part of any build, but it is the most important. So because it's so boring, but important, I'm going to give this section the real YouTube treatment so no one gets too bored. So I'm going to call it, I can't believe more people don't use these 4 game-changing cabinet tricks, and you won't believe what number 4 is. So tip number 1, cut all panels of the same dimension at the same time. Might seem like a no-brainer, but there was a time when I was a no-brainer and I would not have thought about something like this. Basically, with this cabinet, I know every panel is going to be the same width, but then I have quite a few different lengths. So I can set my table saw fence to my finished width dimension and just go to town. Then I can group together parts that will be the same length and cut those at the same time. Some I can do the same way on the table saw, but the longer ones I'll do with my track saw by clamping the panels together and cutting those at the same time. Which brings me to tip number 2, invest in blue tape, because I'm taking that stock to the moon. You can see it here, and I don't want to get busted for insider trading, but I'll tell you, this isn't the last time I used blue tape on this project. I usually talk all about using a high tooth count, dedicated crosscut blade, but my trusty chop master was out getting a much needed sharpening, so blue tape helps me get a nice clean cut and avoid tear out when all I have is my standard combo blade. Tip number 3, make sure your shop is big enough for the projects you want to make. This space is the first time that I have downsized significantly from my previous one. And let me tell you, it's a lot easier to go from small shop to big shop than the other way around. But luckily, I planned ahead, and I knew if I ever needed to cut long stuff at my table saw, I could always open the garage door to do it. I just had to be quick because it was hot outside, and Sean doesn't like to get too hot, if you know what I'm saying. And tip number 4, using glue and screws to assemble cabinets is not always easier, faster, better than using something like dominoes. I only had 2 panels that needed to have no visible fasteners, these 2 side panels, and even these would only have a little bit showing. So I figured I could glue and screw all of my cabinets together because that would be quick and easy. Then I would just domino these 2 outside panels in place. Good idea in theory, but let me just say, sometimes gluing and screwing panels together can be a real pain in the neck. You end up fumbling around trying to clamp everything perfectly in place, with the glue making stuff slide around, and it just...
Oh my god. This has gotten so... It's not working.
Yeah, okay, so next time I might take a slightly different approach, but regardless of that, I pushed forward and got everything put together. All right, so those are my 4 tricks for building cabinets that I can't believe more people aren't using. Drop a comment below, smash that like button, and subscribe for more. I'm not good at YouTube. Hey, real quick, before we keep going, I want to thank Factor for sponsoring today's video. As I'm sure we can all relate to, sometimes life can get busy, and when things get busy, eating healthy and staying active are some of those first things that get sent down the priority list. I know they do for me. Also, on top of that, I'm a terrible cook. But now, eating clean and healthy with no refined seed oils and no refined sugar is super easy with Factor. With their pre-made meals, you're able to find a plan that'll work for your specific health goals, and they have a newly expanded menu with over 80 different rotating weekly meals. They've also expanded their global cuisines range, so they have newly added Asian and Mediterranean meal options as well. Basically, no matter what your health goal or meal preference is, Factor has you covered. And to make it even easier, they have a new meal customization option so you can switch proteins for free. I've been trying out some of their meals lately, and honestly, I can't believe how good they are, and it only takes 2 minutes in the microwave. I can barely pour a bowl of cereal in 2 minutes. So, if simplifying your weekly meals and eating clean and healthy sounds good to you, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code SBMTFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. That's code SBMTFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. How's that for a deal? All right, thanks Factor. So, with the plywood cut into panels, the panels made into boxes, it was time to make those boxes look more like cabinets, and that means I always make my own edge banding, and I always get at least a few questions asking me why. and specifically why I don't use pre-made edge banding, which should be quicker and easier than doing it this way. To be fair, it's a good question and I don't really have a good answer, but just to kind of try to explain myself, here are my top 3 reasons why. Okay, we don't have to do that again. I just feel like making my own gives me a better looking and better feeling end product that I have maximum control over, which that might be the most important part. I can give myself just enough thickness to be able to sand it and not risk messing it up. And I mainly just like to make as many parts as I can myself in a piece of furniture. I'm able to treat the edge banding like an actual piece of wood because it is. And that means I can get the corners looking really nice with 45-degree cuts, and I can dial in all of the cross pieces to fit just right. But I don't really know why I'm having to explain myself. It's just the way I like to do it. If doing it this way is a crime, then, lock me up. Lock me up. On top of all of that, I did just invest a bunch of my money into blue tape. And like I said, I'm trying to take us to the moon. So just saying, if you want to get in on this now, the ground floor, just saying. All right, this is definitely the biggest project that I've done in this shop so far, and we've had a few small shop problems. I mean, I was looking for the camera a minute ago. I couldn't even find it because there's just cabinets and stuff everywhere. So we're gonna get a little organized, and we're almost done with the kind of boring, monotonous stuff. We're getting to some fun stuff. So let's get this cleaned up, and then we can get on to the good stuff. Like we talked about earlier, the 2 doors from the original cabinet were really the star of the show. So it was pretty critical that I did these justice and kept them looking good. But honestly, it was even more critical that I just didn't completely screw them up, because I'm a good neighbor. The 2 doors were basically the same, but each one kind of had its own challenges. Originally, they were right next to each other. So they had kind of an interlocking tongue and groove thing going on, as well as a locking mechanism on one of the doors, basically stuff that would no longer be necessary in the new configuration. And even though the hole for the locking mechanism was on the back side of the door, I couldn't just leave it like that. It's one of those things I know if it were mine, I would notice it every time I opened the door, and I would just kind of always hate to see it. So I decided to take care of it because I'm a good neighbor. I'm a good neighbor. Okay, while I'm doing this old keyhole inlay cover-up thing, I wanted to quickly remind you to go check out our online furniture making courses, as well as our beginner woodworking course. If you're interested in getting into woodworking, or you want to take your skills to the next level, check them out. Links to all of our courses are in the description. Because there was this tongue and groove interlocking thing going on between the doors, it meant on one side I needed to trim away some, and on the other side it needed to be filled in. Trimming was the easy part, but filling in meant I had to first cut the groove square and with a flat bottom. So I used a long straight piece clamped to the door to give me kind of more space to balance the router, along with a piece attached to the router base to act as an edge guide. Then I spliced together a few pieces to fit the groove along the entire length of the door. A little nerve-wracking, and maybe not the easiest part of the build, but I'm a good neighbor. Also, I can't be the only one that loses things in my shop that aren't actually lost, right?
Where's my mallet?
And then remember those piano hinges with a million tiny flathead screws? Similar process with those, since I needed to fill in the rabbet they were recessed into on each door. I also decided to take a crack at filling cracks and chips in the original veneer. This is the part of restoring old furniture that always kind of freaked me out. It's just hard to match old wood with new wood, and any mistakes feel like the consequences are even greater than they are when you're just building something new. But you know, I'm a good neighbor, so I really wanted to do this as well. Obviously, I wasn't going to fix every little blemish, and honestly, that's part of what makes an old piece of furniture look cool. But there were just a few spots that I really felt like I needed to take care of. And I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. Luckily, I had a few small chunks of Clara walnut from some lumber I bought years ago, and it was actually a pretty good match for these doors. And it was definitely a satisfying feeling to cut out the old chipped spots and replace them with some fresh looking pieces. I'm gonna do my best to not let this success go to my head, but I don't know, am I a furniture restoration expert now? Maybe. Okay, so maybe the part of this build that I was the most nervous about, and actually I'm still a little nervous about it because, well, we're not done yet. But the part I was the most nervous about was the 4 small doors that go underneath the TV and between the 2 original doors. And the reason I was/am nervous is that these doors needed to be made from scratch, and the hope is that they would at least somewhat match the 2 existing doors. But again, the existing doors look like this, so not exactly an easy task. When I first started thinking about this project, I wasn't sure what I was going to do for these doors, and I think I was just hopeful that at some point I would kind of just figure it out. And so when I started to take apart that original cabinet, I realized the 2 side panels of that cabinet were veneered with similar looking wood. Obviously, they didn't put the same crazy grain on the sides of the cabinet, but it was at least similar in color and tone. And at the very least, it was going to be closer than anything I'd be able to find at the lumberyard. The other great part, and this was just luck, I guess, the side panels were a 1/4 inch thick veneered plywood, and the tall doors I was trying to match were 1 inch thick. So that meant all I had to do was laminate the 1/4 inch thick panels onto some 3/4 inch thick plywood, and I would have matching thicknesses. I'm sure I've said this before, but sometimes the stuff we stress about the most ends up being kind of the easiest part. And sometimes the stuff we think is going to be the most simple ends up being not. And when I went to edge band the doors, I experienced some of that pain. I think it was a combination of the thicker panels, which meant I needed edge banding that was at least 1 inch wide, along with the fact that I cut each piece of edge banding wider than I usually would. So I had a little more overhang on each side of the door panels. What this did was when I used the blue tape to clamp it to the edge, I was finding that the thin edge banding was starting to bend over the edge of the panel, which obviously was not good. And of course, I discovered this as I was gluing the first piece in place, so I had to quickly figure out that I needed to use some sort of clamping caul to get even pressure across the thickness of the edge. This ended up working, but it just meant my blue tape clamps had to exert enough force to clamp the edge banding along with the caul. So it felt like I was kind of pushing it, but thank goodness for blue tape and its holding power. Best tape in the world and a great stock purchase. Just saying. All right, so this is one of those parts that I was kind of equal parts excited about and a little bit dreading. I'm making new versions of the cabinet handles that already existed. Making something from an antique, trying to remake it, match it, can be tricky, but these ones, if you can see that, they kind of slot over this piece where there used to be a lock. There you can kind of see the profile of it. So I did a quick test to try and get, where's that piece? The process, and I think I've got it down. Let's see how it goes. All right, I'm fully aware that I am maybe getting a little repetitive, but like I keep saying, when you're working on an existing piece of furniture, you're mainly just trying to replicate and match stuff. So after messing around with a few different things, I was able to figure out that I could cut a 1/2 inch roundover on the bottom edge, but not take a full depth cut. Then I could do the same thing with a 3/4 inch roundover bit on the opposite edge, and I could do that cut with the piece laid flat on the router table and then up on its edge. Then I could just finish with a round nose bit on the underside, again, not fully extended, and then finally rip this board about 2/3 of the way into the cove cut, and I was pretty much able to replicate the shape of the existing handles. The nice thing is that I was making these handles slightly smaller because they were going on smaller doors, so I guess I had a little bit of leeway in dimension and proportion for these ones, so they didn't have to match absolutely perfectly, but I feel like I got them pretty close. The last thing I want to do is make something where you look at it and you can obviously tell that it was made by different people at different times. Though, to be fair to myself, it's kind of inevitable when it's a piece this large with so many parts and the amount of time between when it was originally built and now. So for something like this, I want like your typical regular viewer to not notice anything about it. I guess we'll find out once it's all put together because you kind of have to see it as a whole, but that's the idea at least. All right, well, at this point, I am pretty much done making new things, and it's really just getting everything to work together and look like it was all part of the plan from the beginning. So I first decided to get all the hinges installed before finishing everything, just to make sure I didn't totally jack up the finish when doing the hinge installing process. And I'll be honest, this kind of stuff isn't that exciting. It's just a lot of measuring, marking, drilling, installing over and over and over again. Though I will say it is nice to see stuff finally going into place. It's kind of that moment when it finally starts to look like a piece of furniture. And of course, the real magic comes when I get to sand and finish the entire thing. I tell myself I get to instead of have to try and trick myself into thinking it's enjoyable. Sanding and finishing is already not a favorite activity of mine, but especially when I have to do it on such big cabinets. Though I will say, finally adding finish to some of the existing panels, and especially these doors, almost made it worth it. The grain on these is so wild, and it felt good to help put some life back into the work of someone that I'm sure had a lot of pride in this piece a long time ago. So I'm gonna try to not pat myself on the back too much about this one. At the end of the day, my neighbors had a job that needed to be done, and I was the guy that did that job. There really isn't much more to it than that. But getting to do this for my neighbors was an extra bonus that I didn't realize was going to be such a point of pride for me. It wasn't just a client-maker relationship. Most of the time it feels like everyone's so focused on the sale and what something's worth and how it's going to perform online. And we kind of forget what it feels like to build something just because it matters to someone and the connection that can create. I got a bit of that feeling on this one, and honestly, I think I might be chasing that feeling going forward. So, do I know how to be a good neighbor? Maybe. Do I know how to restore and rebuild antique furniture? That's also a maybe. But did I love doing it? And did it, fill my cup? Absolutely. And if that's a crime, then lock me up.